CO249 lives in 80 meters, the impossible landing that saved an entire flight. When you've got 249 lives in your hands and only 80 meters of runway ahead, every second turns into eternity. I'm Captain Charles Mitchell, and this is the story of how an impossible landing became the difference between tragedy and miracle. Buckle up for a journey that forever changed my view on aviation's limits and what it means to carry the weight of hundreds of lives on your shoulders. My name is Charles Edward Mitchell. I'm 52 years old with more than 25,000 flight hours logged in my commercial pilot's license. Born and raised in a small town outside Dallas, Texas, son of an aircraft mechanic and an elementary school teacher. My old man, Jim Mitchell, worked at the local airport fixing crop dusters, and from age 5 I spent my weekends hanging around engines, propellers, and that unmistakable smell of aviation fuel. He's the one who taught me that an airplane is just a complex machine, but the pilot is what turns metal and fuel into dreams come true. On that fateful March day, exactly 3 days after completing 25 years of flying without a single major incident, I was commanding a Boeing 747-400, whose registration number I prefer not to disclose, a true flying city weighing 412 tons when fully loaded. It was an aircraft I knew inside and out. I'd flown her 47 times over the past 2 years, knew every quirk of her systems, every specific sound of her Pratt & Whitney engines, every characteristic vibration during different flight phases. We were carrying 249 souls between passengers and crew on a 14-hour, 35-minute trans-Pacific route, connecting 2 continents across 11,000 kilometers of open ocean. It was a red-eye flight that should have been absolutely routine, one of those we do hundreds of times throughout our careers, connecting families separated by distance, taking business folks to close deals that would change lives, transporting students heading toward their academic dreams in foreign lands. Weather was exceptionally favorable with 15-knot tailwinds, unlimited visibility stretching beyond the horizon, stable atmospheric pressure at 1013 hectopascals, and not a single cloud marring the star-lit Pacific sky. The aircraft had passed all rigorous A, B, C, and D safety inspections over the past 6 months, including complete engine checks just 72 hours prior. All systems were operating, not just within normal parameters, but with exemplary performance. My crew that night was composed of the best professionals I could ask for. Robert Johnson, my first officer for 5 years, graduate of the same flight school as me, father of twin boys and holder of 12,000 flight hours. Mike Rodriguez, our flight engineer with 30 years of impeccable service, a veteran who'd flown everything from small single engines to corporate jets before specializing in heavy commercial aviation, and 8 flight attendants, led by the incomparable chief purser Sarah Williams, a 15-year professional who'd handled everything from severe turbulence to passenger medical emergencies, always maintaining the calm competence that defines the best in the business. I had taken off at 23:30 from an international airport whose 4,200-meter runway gave us a smooth, uneventful departure, carrying a precious cargo of 249 human lives. Entire families heading to honeymoon vacations they'd planned for years, executives carrying million-dollar contracts in their briefcases, college students on their first international flight bound for exchange programs that would determine their futures, grandparents traveling to meet grandchildren they'd only known through video calls, doctors attending conferences that might result in life-saving treatments, engineers carrying projects that could revolutionize entire industries. During my early years as a commercial pilot, starting with small 30-passenger regional aircraft, I'd always dreamed big about long-haul flights like this, the complex technical responsibility, international coordination, the almost mystical feeling of commanding a true masterpiece of aeronautical engineering through the skies, connecting cultures and continents. At that specific moment, cruising smoothly at 41,000 feet and 900 kilometers per hour, with cabin lights dimmed to allow for overnight rest and the gentle hum of 4 turbofan engines creating a relaxing mechanical symphony, I was about to discover that some of our most cherished dreams can turn into terrifying nightmares in a matter of unpredictable seconds. The first subtle sign that something was starting to go seriously wrong came as we were flying over the deep, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, approximately 1,200 kilometers from the nearest coastline, in a region that we long-haul pilots know and secretly fear, called technically the point of no return, that mathematically calculated place where you're exactly equidistant between origin and destination airports, where there's no turning back, and where any emergency becomes exponentially more dangerous due to absolute geographical isolation. It all started with a subtle but unmistakable low-frequency audible alarm echoing through the main panel at exactly 1:45 in the morning, aircraft local time. It was a deep, continuous, modulated tone that made my stomach contract instantly, with the force of a closed fist. In 25,000 accumulated flight hours over 2.5 decades, you develop an almost supernatural sixth sense for sounds, vibrations, and even smells that shouldn't be present during normal flight. It's a skill that develops gradually, subconsciously, through thousands of hours of exposure to perfectly functioning aircraft, until any deviation from normalcy triggers internal alarms before your conscious mind processes what's happening. The digital fuel indicator for engine number 2 began flashing intermittent red on the main panel, accompanied by the red capital letter message, "Fuel leak engine 2, immediate action required," blinking insistently on the aircraft's electronic information system main display. Simultaneously, the onboard computer emitted 3 distinct alert tones, followed by the synthetic female voice announcing, "Fuel leak detected. Engine 2, fuel leak detected, engine 2. Initially, with the desperate optimism that characterizes experienced pilots in anomalous situations, I tried to convince myself that I was witnessing an electronic sensor malfunction, something relatively common on long-distance flights, especially in aircraft with over 15 years of intensive commercial operation like ours, which had accumulated more than 73,000 flight hours and 31,000 pressurization cycles since rolling off Boeing's production line in 2008. Electronic sensors, especially those constantly exposed to vibration, extreme temperature variations, and cosmic radiation at high altitude, occasionally present erroneous readings that can be corrected with a simple system reset or temporary circuit isolation. But when First Officer Robert, with his 12 years of experience and sharp instincts I'd learned to deeply respect, pointed toward the backup secondary monitors with a visibly concerned face and said, "Captain, confirm these numbers," I immediately realized we weren't dealing with a simple electronic malfunction. The independent monitors, operating on completely separate systems and fed by different sensors, showed exactly the same alarming readings. When multiple independent systems agree on an anomalous situation, the probability of simultaneous failure becomes statistically negligible. "Captain, we're losing fuel at a rate of 150 liters per minute on engine 2, said Robert, his voice maintaining that characteristic professional calm that all commercial pilots develop through years of simulator training and emergency situations. But I could clearly detect the underlying tension vibrating in every word, the growing concern he was fighting to control. "The rate is progressively increasing. Now it's 165 liters per minute, 180 liters per minute. In just 15 minutes of continuous observation, we lost exactly 2,700 liters of fuel, enough quantity to fly for more than 2 hours and 15 minutes under normal cruise conditions, fuel that was literally being wasted in the thin air of high atmosphere. We immediately initiated all standard emergency procedures, established by aircraft operation manuals and certified by international aeronautical authorities. Complete isolation of the affected engine's fuel system through closure of main and secondary valves, methodical verification of all cross-feed valves between tanks, alternative fuel rerouting through backup systems from reserve tanks located in the fuselage central sections, integrity testing of all unaffected fuel lines, pressure verification in main and auxiliary tanks. Mike Rodriguez, our flight engineer with 3 decades of experience troubleshooting complex problems in virtually every type of existing commercial aircraft, was furiously consulting the 2,847-page technical manuals he knew practically by heart, while I systematically tried different configurations on the sophisticated electronic fuel management system, testing alternative routes, verifying isolation valves, experimenting with different pump pressures. We also utilized the aircraft's automatic diagnostic systems, which ran 47 different internal tests, searching for secondary or correlated failures. Nothing worked. Absolutely nothing. Every attempt to interrupt or reduce the leak resulted in total failure. With each precious minute that passed, our flight autonomy decreased drastically while we watched, helplessly, our vital fuel being wasted in the atmosphere. It was like watching a giant hourglass being flipped, with our collective survival trickling grain by grain through a crack we couldn't find or fix. What made the situation exponentially more critical and desperate was our specific geographical location at that exact moment of emergency. We were flying precisely over the middle of the Pacific Ocean, at a point that veteran transoceanic route pilots know and secretly dread, technically called dead zone, or point of maximum isolation, an area where you're mathematically too far to safely return to the origin airport, due to fuel already consumed in the flight's first half, but still too distant to reach the planned destination within operational safety limits. It's the geographical nightmare of any long-distance pilot, being in the middle of nowhere when everything goes wrong. With the current exponentially increasing leak rate, which had risen to 195 liters per minute and continued accelerating, our most optimistic calculations indicated we had remaining fuel for approximately 2 hours and 50 minutes of flight under ideal conditions. However, we would need at least 5 hours and 20 minutes to reach the nearest commercial airport in any possible direction, an impossible mathematical equation that left no margin for optimistic interpretations or conventional solutions. It was at that moment of growing controlled desperation that I decided to contact Oceanic Air Traffic Control through the International Emergency Frequency 121.5 MHz. Pacific Oceanic Control Center. This is heavy aircraft on Trans-Pacific route requesting immediate assistance for critical fuel emergency. I transmitted using the most controlled and professional voice I could produce, despite feeling my heart beating like an out-of-control typewriter. We have critical and progressive fuel leak on engine 2, current loss rate at 200 liters per minute, and increasing. We urgently request emergency landing alternatives in our current operational area. After several minutes, that seemed like tense hours of satellite communication, complicated by transmission delays and atmospheric interference, the air traffic controller, speaking with that characteristic professional calm but with a perceptible note of urgency and concern in his voice, informed us about a small remote military installation located exactly 180 kilometers from our current position. Remington Island Military Installation has an emergency runway with dimensions of 80 meters length by 15 meters width, he said, and I could clearly perceive the significant hesitation in his voice, as if he himself couldn't believe the words he was pronouncing. The facility was built exclusively for small rescue aircraft, military transport helicopters, and in extreme cases, light executive jets. There's no historical record of any large commercial aircraft ever having attempted to use that runway. Robert looked at me with a facial expression that mixed total incredulity, barely contained terror, and a kind of fatalistic acceptance I immediately recognized. We both knew the numbers by heart, engraved in our memory through years of rigorous technical training. A fully loaded Boeing 747-400 needs at least 1,500 meters of runway to land safely under ideal meteorological conditions, favorable winds, and all systems functioning perfectly. To stop completely to zero speed, considering maximum landing weight and braking systems functioning at full capacity, we would need at least 2,100 meters of runway. We were talking about a runway almost 26 times smaller than the technically necessary minimum, according to all aeronautical operation manuals, all international certification protocols, and all known physics of modern commercial aviation. It was literally impossible according to any known mathematical calculation of modern commercial aviation. It was the type of scenario that simulator instructors present as an example of no viable solution situations to teach pilots to accept irrecoverable physical limitations. But as minutes passed like slow-motion hours, and our precious fuel continued inexorably draining through the dark Pacific skies, I realized with crystal clear and terrible clarity that mathematically impossible was rapidly becoming our only concrete option for collective survival. I then began mentally calculating all physical variables involved in this apparently suicidal scenario. With the aircraft's current estimated weight of approximately 385 tons, including rapidly diminishing remaining fuel, total cargo, and 249 people, Our mandatory minimum approach speed would be at least 235 kilometers per hour. Any speed below that would result in critical loss of aerodynamic lift and uncontrolled aircraft fall. On a runway of exactly 80 meters, we would have less than 1.23 times seconds to decelerate from 235 km/h to 0 kilometers per hour. Any microscopic calculation error, any unexpected wind gust, any partial failure in braking systems, any irregularity in runway surface, any abrupt movement in controls would mean not only my death and Robert's and Mike's, but also the violent death of 246 completely innocent passengers who had trusted their precious lives to our professional competence and ability to make correct decisions under extreme pressure. I then began communicating discreetly with Sarah through the aircraft's internal intercom system, carefully choosing each word to convey the situation's gravity without creating unnecessary panic. "Sarah, I need you to prepare the cabin and discreetly orient passengers for an unscheduled landing at a remote military facility," I said, using specific technical terminology she would immediately understand. "Implement Category 4 emergency procedures, but keep passengers calm and confident. Don't mention specific operation details." I deliberately omitted the terrifying technical details of the situation. There was no practical need to create generalized panic before the critical moment, and my 25 years of experience had taught me that panicked passengers represent a significant additional danger, greater than any mechanical emergency. Sarah, with her impressive 15 years of experience as chief purser and veteran of countless challenging situations, including severe turbulence, in-flight medical emergencies, cabin depressurization, and even a hijacking attempt in 2019, immediately understood the extreme gravity of the situation just from the specific tonality of my voice and the technical terminology used. "Understood, Captain. Implementing Category 4 now. I'll keep you informed about any cabin developments," she responded, with that serene competence that reassured me even in the most stressful situations. Meanwhile, Robert was meticulously recalculating our exact route to the military island, using all sophisticated navigation resources available on the aircraft. Primary GPS system with 3-meter precision, independent secondary GPS system, backup inertial navigation systems, navigation radio beacons when available in the region, and even celestial navigation techniques as additional precaution. A nearly lost skill in the modern era, but still part of our mandatory training for extreme situations, exactly like this. Each calculation needed to be verified and re-verified, as we wouldn't have sufficient fuel to correct navigation errors. Mike worked intensively on complex weight and center of gravity calculations, determining exactly how much fuel we should dump through the dumping systems before final approach to reduce our landing mass to the absolute minimum possible. It was a cruel and ironic paradox. We were desperately trying to conserve every drop of fuel due to the critical leak, but simultaneously needed to deliberately discard thousands of precious liters to reduce our weight and increase our microscopic survival chance. Each number needed to be mathematically perfect. A single additional ton could mean some crucial extra meters of rollout that we simply didn't have available. The complex controlled emergency descent process began when we were exactly 62 kilometers from the remote military island. I initiated a carefully calculated descent from 41,000 feet to 10,000 feet, following an optimized trajectory to conserve fuel while preparing the aircraft for the most challenging approach of my career. Simultaneously, I activated the fuel dumping systems installed at wing extremities, strategically discharging thousands of liters into the atmosphere to reduce our landing weight. It was paradoxical and painful. We were losing fuel through the involuntary leak, and now also deliberately discarding even more fuel. It was like watching our survival hope drain in two directions simultaneously. Robert was obsessively calculating our remaining fuel rate every 30 seconds, creating a constant countdown that echoed in the cabin like a death clock. Fuel for 2 hours and 12 minutes. 2 hours and 6 minutes. Exactly 2 hours. Meanwhile, I gradually adjusted flaps for approach configuration, reduced power of the 4 turbofan engines to the minimum operational necessary to maintain aircraft control, and repeatedly and obsessively tested all braking systems. Main wheel brakes of the landing gear, anti-skid system to prevent skidding, engine reversers, aerodynamic spoilers, and even backup emergency brakes. Every control movement had to be mathematically perfect and technically impeccable. There was no microscopic margin for human error, no possibility of a second attempt, no alternative plan B or C. It was literally all or nothing, complete success or collective death, with no possible middle ground. As we approached the island through the impenetrable darkness of the oceanic dawn, I could finally glimpse through the cockpit windscreen the minuscule concrete strip illuminated by red and white emergency lights, surrounded only by infinite black ocean in all possible directions. The runway appeared even smaller than I had managed to imagine in my most pessimistic mental scenarios. It literally looked like a toothpick floating in the dark and hostile Pacific immensity. All my accumulated experience of 25,000 hours, flying from small crop dusters to large commercial jets, was internally screaming that what we were trying to execute was pure aeronautical suicide without precedent in commercial aviation history. There was no record anywhere in the world of an aircraft of this size attempting to land on such an absurdly small runway. It was the type of maneuver that existed only in action movies or pilots' nightmares, but something deeper and more intuitive within me, perhaps the accumulated and synthesized voice of all experienced instructors I'd had since my trembling first days in civilian flight school at age 23, persistently whispered that there was still a microscopic but real chance, a possibility that challenged all known laws of aeronautical physics and all established safety protocols, but still a concrete chance if we could execute everything with absolute perfection and no margin for error. Robert began methodically reciting the complete emergency approach checklist, while Mike obsessively monitored all critical engine parameters: exhaust gas temperature, oil pressure, turbine rotation, fuel pressure. At 15 kilometers from the island, I could clearly see through the windscreen that ocean waves were breaking violently and constantly against the volcanic rocks around the small runway, a terrifying visual reminder that any error, however small, would send us directly into the cold and rough Pacific waters, where our collective survival chances would be absolutely zero. The final approach was the most intensely terrifying, technically demanding, and emotionally devastating experience of my entire career as a professional pilot. At 800 meters altitude and 12 kilometers from the runway, I made the riskiest and most technically questionable decision of my entire aeronautical life. I completely shut down 2 of the 4 Pratt & Whitney turbofan engines to drastically reduce our total operational weight and increase our theoretical aerodynamic braking capacity through reduction of residual thrust. It was a maneuver completely contrary to all established safety protocols, all aeronautical certification procedures, and all conventional operational logic, but it was our only microscopic mathematical chance to reduce approach speed to something remotely close to manageable on a runway of absurdly inadequate dimensions. Shutting down engines 1 and 4, I announced to Robert and Mike, maintaining only engines 2 and 3 at minimum power for control. It was a desperate gamble with human lives, a decision that could easily result in total loss of aircraft control, but it was also our only mathematical hope for survival. Robert was reciting critical speeds in metronomic 5-second intervals: 280, 270, 250, 240, 220, 200, 185. His voice maintained that characteristic professional calm that defined experienced commercial pilots, but I could clearly feel his hands trembling almost imperceptibly on the secondary controls, a vibration I recognized because my own hands were doing exactly the same thing. The minuscule runway ahead of us literally appeared the size of a postage stamp, precariously glued in the middle of infinite oceanic darkness. The approach lights blinked in hypnotizing white-red-white sequence, but seemed to be approaching with terrifying and apparently uncontrolled speed. It was a known optical illusion in nighttime approaches, but one that became especially disturbing when you knew you were trying to execute something technically impossible. At 200 meters critical altitude, I simultaneously activated all available aerodynamic spoilers on the aircraft and pushed the reversers of the 2 remaining engines to absolute maximum, an extreme configuration that should be used exclusively after safe runway touchdown, never during active approach. The Boeing 747 began shaking violently, as if being shaken by an invisible and furious giant. The noise became deafening and disconcerting, a cacophonous combination of engines operating at maximum reverse, air passing turbulently through completely extended spoilers, and the aircraft structure audibly and visibly protesting against extreme aerodynamic forces for which it wasn't originally designed or certified. I could feel the entire fuselage vibrating worryingly, as if about to disintegrate under extraordinary stresses. In the first rows of business class, several passengers began screaming in genuine terror. Through the large windows, they could clearly see we were rapidly approaching a surface that seemed physically and mathematically impossible to accommodate our gigantic aircraft. The visual contrast was terrifying. Our Boeing 747, with its 70-meter length, approaching a runway of only 80 meters. It was like trying to park a bus in a motorcycle space. The flight attendants, rigorously following emergency protocol they'd practiced hundreds of times in training, but never expected to use in real situations, shouted clear and repetitive instructions. Heads down. Remain in impact position. Arms crossed over chest. Prepare for immediate evacuation. Sarah was strategically positioned in the emergency position near the main evacuation door, already wearing her life vest and ready to initiate emergency evacuation procedures in case we managed to survive the imminent impact. Her 15 years of experience had prepared her for many situations, but nothing remotely comparable to what was about to happen. Mike was firmly gripping his seat, obsessively checking final engine parameters while whispering a prayer I could hear through the intercommunication system. At the critical and definitive moment of runway touchdown, I felt the main landing gear strike the military runway concrete with a force that reverberated throughout the entire fuselage like a magnitude 7 earthquake. The impact was so brutally violent that several overhead compartments opened instantly, and carry-on luggage began flying dangerously through the cabin like projectiles. Passengers screamed, some cried, others prayed in languages I couldn't identify. Immediately after touchdown, I activated the complex anti-skid brake system with absolute maximum force, applying pedal pressure as if my life and the lives of 248 other people literally depended on it, because it really did. Simultaneously, I maintained the reverses of the two functioning engines at extreme maximum power and spoilers completely extended, creating a combination of braking forces that had never been tested under real operating conditions. I was literally praying that the main landing gear tires would withstand the extreme pressure and heat generated by intense braking without catastrophically blowing out. If we lost a tire at that moment, it would be the end of all of us. The Boeing 747 slid across the microscopic runway at a speed that was still mortally and dangerously high. Through the windscreen, I could see with terrifying clarity the runway's end approaching at seemingly supersonic speed. Robert was shouting remaining distances like an apocalyptic countdown to the end. 100 meters remaining, 80 meters, 60, 40, 30, 20, 15, 10. I could smell the acrid and penetrating odor of burning rubber from the tires invading the cabin through the aircraft's ventilation system, mixed with the metallic smell of superheated brakes operating far beyond their design specifications. At exactly 8 meters from the runway's end, with our speed still dangerously high at 35 kilometers per hour, I applied one last desperate and violent pressure to the brakes, using all the strength in my legs and completely ignoring the risk of locking the wheels. Mike shouted, "It's going to overshoot, won't stop," going straight into the ocean. But exactly at the moment I thought we were inevitably heading straight into the Pacific's cold waters, I managed to completely stop the aircraft. When I looked forward through the windscreen, I saw that the nose wheel was literally 2.3 meters from the runway's edge, 2 meters and 30 centimeters. It was the difference between life and collective death for 249 people. We remained in absolute and sepulchral silence for some seconds that seemed like eternity, only hearing the metallic noise of engine cooling systems, the characteristic creaking of aircraft structure settling after extreme stresses, the whistle of oceanic wind passing through the fuselage, and our own heartbeats hammering in our ears like tribal war drums. When I finally shut down the 2 remaining engines and removed my headset with hands that were shaking uncontrollably as if I had Parkinson's, I realized it wasn't just the normal physiological effects of adrenaline dissipating from my system. It was the absolutely absurd magnitude of what had just happened. In 30 years of aeronautical career spanning from military flights in my youth to 2 complete decades of civil commercial aviation, including training in extreme emergency situations I thought covered any conceivable scenario. I never imagined I would execute a maneuver that all aeronautical operation manuals, all advanced training simulators, all international safety protocols, and all known physics of modern commercial aviation classify as literally impossible, without qualifications or exceptions. But maybe that's exactly what aviation teaches us in its deepest and most transformative existential lessons, that rigid technical limits exist to be religiously respected in 99.99% of normal operational situations, establishing safety margins that protect millions of lives every day, but sometimes, under extreme circumstances that defy all conventional logic and occur perhaps once in a million flights, those limits can be temporarily transcended through the perfect mathematical combination of deeply rooted technical knowledge, operational experience accumulated over decades, and a millimetrically controlled dose of calculated courage that flirts with the frontier between bravery and madness. The complex and logistically challenging evacuation process of the 249 people aboard took exactly 6 hours and 47 timed minutes, executed with Seahawk military rescue helicopters making constant and meticulously coordinated trips of 22 minutes each between our isolated island and Navy support ships, strategically positioned 50 kilometers from shore. Each helicopter could safely transport a maximum of 12 people per trip, including survival equipment and emergency medical supplies, resulting in 21 total trips over nearly 7 hours of continuous rescue operation. Each face I saw exiting orderly from the aircraft through the yellow emergency slides carried a complex and emotionally intense mixture of profound gratitude, absolute incredulity, relief that transcended any verbal description, and a kind of silent reverence that touched me in ways I couldn't completely process at that moment. An elderly lady of approximately 78 years, who I later discovered was a retiree traveling to visit her newborn great-granddaughter, hugged me with tears flowing freely down her wrinkled face and said with a trembling voice, "Captain, thank you for returning us to our families. You're an angel sent by God to protect us." A business executive of approximately 45 years, carrying an executive briefcase that I later discovered contained $3 million contracts, shook my hand with almost painful force and said, "Captain, I've flown over 2 million kilometers in my life on international business, visited 73 countries, but I'll never forget this landing for the rest of my existence. You redefined what I thought was possible." A young 19-year-old university student traveling for her first exchange semester in aeronautical engineering, irony that didn't go unnoticed, told me, "Now I know definitely that I chose the right career. I want to learn to do what you did today." In those moments charged with extreme emotion, I understood profoundly and viscerally that there's no concept of technically impossible landing when 249 precious human lives depend completely on your accumulated technical competence, your ability to make correct decisions under extreme pressure, and your willingness to redefine the limits of what you consider possible when no viable alternatives are available. In the following months, the official investigation conducted by an extraordinary joint commission of international aeronautical authorities, including representatives from the American FAA, European EASA, civil aviation authorities from 5 different countries, and independent Boeing specialists, concluded after exhaustive analysis that the critical failure in the fuel system was caused by a microscopic crack of only 0.28 millimeters in an aerospace-grade titanium alloy pipe located in the right wing's internal structure, a failure so small it was physically impossible to detect during the most rigorous routine inspections available, even using industrial X-ray equipment, high-resolution ultrasound, or magnetic particle inspection. The investigation revealed that this specific crack had developed gradually over approximately 18 months through 4,247 aircraft pressurization and depressurization cycles, a technical phenomenon known as cyclic material fatigue, which, paradoxically, is statistically more common in exceptionally well-maintained and frequently used aircraft, where the total number of stress cycles accumulates faster than in aircraft with lower operational utilization. The official final report, a 247-page technical document including detailed metallurgical analyses, computational fluid dynamics simulations, precise event sequence reconstruction, and recommendations for future prevention. Officially classified the event as exceptionally successful emergency landing executed under extreme operational conditions that significantly transcend normal aeronautical certification parameters and limits established by large commercial aircraft operation manuals. But for me, Robert, Mike, and our entire crew who lived those terrifying and transformative hours, it was much more than official technical terminology or statistics for government reports. It was a profound existential lesson about how 3 complete decades of intensive professional preparation, continuous training, and diversified operational experience can condense and crystallize into some crucial minutes, where the subtle but fundamental difference between adequate technical competence and exceptional operational excellence literally becomes the difference between life and collective death for hundreds of people. The experience fundamentally and permanently changed my philosophical perspective on the theoretical and practical limits of modern commercial aviation. I learned through direct experience that there's a crucial, subtle but real difference between impossible, according to technical manuals and certification protocols, and impossible in physical reality under extreme circumstances with perfect execution. Operational manuals are carefully and conservatively written for normal and predictable situations, establishing safety margins that protect millions of lives daily. But real life occasionally presents unique scenarios that aren't contemplated in any technical manual. Situations where accumulated human experience and the ability to make calculated decisions under extreme psychological pressure become more valuable than any standardized procedure or established protocol. During the 14 months following the incident, I participated in 23 international technical conferences, 7 aeronautical safety symposiums, 12 pilot training sessions in advanced simulators, and 3 documentaries produced by Aviation specialized channels. In each presentation, I always emphasized that our survival wasn't the result of luck or miracle, but rather the extreme application of accumulated knowledge, training, and experience. The luck was only having had 25 years to prepare for those critical minutes. Today, when I train new pilots in state-of-the-art flight simulators or conduct intensive technical review sessions and emergency procedures, I always tell this story in complete and technical detail, not to encourage them to attempt risky maneuvers or ignore established safety protocols. On the contrary, to dramatically illustrate that commercial aviation is an extraordinary profession where absolute technical competence and encyclopedic systems knowledge must always walk hand in hand with the mental capacity to think outside conventional parameters when human lives are at direct stake. I explain in detail that it's not the routine 14-hour flights, however technically complex they may be, that truly define a professional pilot. It's the rare critical moments when all automatic systems fail simultaneously, all standardized protocols become inadequate for the specific situation, and you still manage to find an apparently impossible way to bring everyone home safely through creative application of fundamental knowledge and operational experience. If you're regularly following the Black Box channel, know that each story we share here carries multiple overlapping layers of valuable lessons about the skies, about advanced aeronautical technology, about safety procedures, but mainly about the critical human element in modern aviation. The impossible 80-meter landing taught me that sometimes we need to completely and fundamentally redefine what we consider possible within physics limits, but always based on solid technical knowledge, precise mathematical calculations, and deep operational experience. I sincerely hope this transformative experience inspires you to face your own professional and personal challenges with the same combination of meticulous preparation, calculated determination, and willingness to transcend apparent limitations when circumstances demand exceptional excellence. Aviation taught me that limits exist to define what's normal and safe, but true professional competence is revealed in the ability to go beyond those limits when necessary, always based on knowledge and never on recklessness. And always remember this fundamental truth. Behind every safe commercial flight that reaches its destination without incidents, operating on time and without drama, there are pilots who dedicated complete decades of their lives to being technically, mentally, and psychologically ready for the statistically improbable but always possible moment when the impossible becomes the only viable option for collective survival. That constant preparation, that continuous training, that pursuit of operational excellence is exactly what allows more than 40,000 daily commercial flights around the world to operate with safety indices that dramatically surpass any other means of transportation known to humanity. If you made it this far in this story, subscribe to the Black Box channel, because you clearly appreciate real stories that show the best of aviation and the human element under pressure. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tales from the skies. And have you ever wondered how many times per day pilots around the world face decisions that can change everything in a matter of seconds? Next time you board an airplane, remember, there's much more happening in the cockpit than you imagine. Sometimes the difference between reaching your destination and not reaching it is measured in meters, seconds, and the courage to redefine the impossible. If this story touched you like it touched me, subscribe to the Black Box channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any tales from the skies. Leave in the comments, what was the toughest decision you've ever had to make under pressure? Share this video so more people can learn about the real and inspiring stories of modern aviation. This story is based on real events. All names have been changed to protect the privacy of those involved. Special thanks to aviation professionals who share their experiences to make the skies safer.